Welcome to the Future Ready Spotlight Podcast. My name is Jackney Prioli, Director of Future Ready Massachusetts with the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education. On this episode of Future Ready Spotlight, we are joined by Ann Berrigan, Senior Program Manager of Youth Employment Initiatives, and Jennifer Applebaum, Senior Program Manager for Curriculum Development and Training at Commonwealth Corporation. Data shows a lack of early work experience has long-term impacts on career and college attainment for youth. On this month's episode, we'll learn about the soft skills employers have identified as being critical to success and how a new curriculum, Signal Success, helps youth acquire the knowledge, skills, and attitudes employers are looking for. Ann and Jennifer, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Well, before we dive into the Signal Success curriculum, can you talk a little bit about Commonwealth Corporation's work and how it came to focus on tackling youth unemployment and preparing youth to be career ready?
Sure. Well, ComCorp has always had a Youth Pathways program, and the focus of that program was to support young people in employability and education. All right, so we've been working really hard to help primarily marginalized young people, such as young people in the DYS system, the Youth Juvenile Justice System, to continue their education while they're in DYS and to gain employability skills so that when they're out in the community, they're ready to get a job. So our focus has always been on education and employability.
Great. So really centering around creating these pathways for youth and adults, but there's data that shows us that it's becoming challenging for youth to find jobs. Can you talk about why and give us a brief overview of teen unemployment trends over the last 20 years?
Sure. And I also probably should have said before about ComCorp's role in sort of focusing on teen unemployment. In addition to our DYS work, we also run the YouthWorks program, which is a state-funded jobs program that's been in existence since the late 90s, which were kind of the good times for youth employment. So what we've seen over the last 20 years is a real steady decline in the participation rate of young people in employment. So I think the 1990s were the high point, particularly in Massachusetts. We were doing better than the rest of the country. We were about 55% of young people, teens 16 to 19, working or having jobs, right, as part of their, teen experience. And the lowest point was in 2011 with about 26% working. And since 2011, it's slightly gone up again, but still around 28%. So it represents a really large decline in teen employment. And the story is, when there were these cyclical recessions, young people never recovered. Adults got jobs again, but young people didn't. And in the last one, we really saw the biggest decline of young people losing out the job market. So we knew that this was a long-term problem. It wasn't just related to the last recession in 2008. Right. And we're asking, well, what's the reason? Why aren't employers, picking up teens again? So in 2012 and 13, we did some research with Drexel University, and we did a lot of survey work in Massachusetts employers, and we found that they're not hiring young people because they don't think they have some core employability skills, like dependability. They're not showing up. They can't rely on them. They don't see positive work behaviors. They don't think they're really like a good bet to hire a young person versus an older person who has maybe more responsibilities and a longer-term focus on the job. So that's the trend. The trend has been going down, and it's largely because employers don't see young people having the skills that they want them to bring to the workforce.
So they don't have the skills, but you're saying it's not necessarily the hard skills.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. There was some good news in the research, and as far as entry-level job candidates go, young people have the same amount of reading, writing, and math, and superior technology skills. They have some of those harder skills. They're not showing up with the dependability. When they're off task, they're not asking for the next thing to do. They're just not being probably as useful as people who have job experience know how to be.
So it's really the soft skills, the interpersonal skills.
Yeah, the soft skills. Knowing how to communicate on the job, knowing how to collaborate, knowing how to pick up slack, going beyond your job description, going beyond the things you're supposed to be doing as part of your routine.
Why are the soft skills so important for young people who are seeking these entry-level positions?
Well, the soft skills that we're focusing on, sort of the dependability, communication, collaboration, and initiative, are soft skills that are important not only at your first job, but as you move up in life, they're always important. If young people don't get practice in these skills, they're really going to have a hard time as they grow older and compete with other folks who have developed these skills.
How is the Signal Success curriculum addressing the lack of the soft skills?
So the curriculum is directly focused on soft skill acquisition, and that's actually a really tricky thing to do. So one of the things that's interesting about soft skills is that you can really talk to young people or even adults a lot about what's needed, and just the knowledge of what to do is not really what produces the change. So I'll give you an example. A lot of the youth that we work with, if we talk to them around dependability, around showing up on time for the job, almost all of them know that you should be on time. There is sometimes a little bit of a misunderstanding around what constitutes on time,
Right.
Because maybe they've been in more forgiving environments where a few minutes late may not be such a big deal, whereas for a shift job that can be a problem. So not to say there's no issue around concrete knowledge, but really the issue is more around skills, behaviors, and attitudes. And so most young people know that they should be on time, but they don't necessarily have the habits that support that, and additionally their attitudes and behaviors might get in the way. So in order to really address this soft skill change, what we really do is focus on experience-centered learning. And what that allows students to do is to have a place to really actually practice these skills so that they can get better at it, and also examine what other things in terms of their attitudes or behaviors might be places where there's a conflict with the skill, so that they can start to see, well, if I really want to be able to do this, I need to think differently about X, Y, and Z. I need to change these behaviors. And that's what constitutes the growth. It's a longer process. It doesn't take a very long time to tell someone what's expected at a job. It takes a very long time to help someone understand how to deliver on what's expected. So we've really been focused on creating activities and workshops that scaffold that allow young people the opportunity to not only better understand what's expected of them, but to have the opportunity to practice that through scenarios, through activities, through examining different components of their own experience, and also what they know from the adults around them, so that they can progress along that.
This is great, and it really connects with one of our Future Ready messages, which is Look Beyond. And it's about encouraging students to gain work and life experience outside of the classroom, specifically, around finding jobs and internships, participating in activities outside of the classroom that can help them explore interests and begin to build a workplace and interpersonal skills that you're talking about. And so it seems like this is one of these kind of look beyond activities.
Absolutely. And this is also an activity that helps young people also leverage their other look beyond activities. So what we find is that when we work with young people in the workshops, young people that are engaging in those other look beyond activities that you just mentioned in terms of volunteering or maybe job shadows, they have more to draw on and they're able to make more progress. And so we encourage that within the program, but also encourage it in other programs, because it creates a stronger set of context for young people to draw on so that they can understand these issues better and they can drill down on really developing the skills.
So this curriculum, started to address the growing rate of youth unemployment in part. And in doing so, you're actually providing these really valuable career readiness skills for young people and doing it in a way that students connect with. So could you describe some of the activities that you have students do?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll sort of try and describe maybe the activities in terms of buckets, types of activities. So one thing is we always start every session with what we call your point of view. And it's a way to get young people to actually start to think about what they already know and think about the topic. And this is really important because it sets the stage for it to not just be some simple knowledge transfer where the adult in front of the room is saying, you should know these things. What we're saying is actually a lot of us know a lot of things. We need to figure out which things are helpful in that picture and which things maybe actually we need to have another experience to help us figure it out. So that's one thing that we do. The other thing that's really big in the curriculum is we take a look at a lot of team building activities and use them as a way to practice these skills. So the same skills that are really important in work in terms of being successful on a job are usually important in any project. So, while we can't necessarily in a classroom duplicate what it's like to have a shift experience at a first job, trying to get through a challenging timed activity isn't really terribly different from working in a time-sensitive, pressured job. So we'll have youth try and construct something in a set amount of time or negotiate over scarce resources and see how that opportunity allows them to really sort of build up those communication and collaboration skills. The other thing we do is a lot of scenario-based work. So there's an opportunity to really think through things before you encounter that. So one example is in our learning styles section, we have young people think about what it's like when you're working with a supervisor that may have a really different learning or communication style than you. So you're somebody that really likes things written down, your boss is just going to talk at you. How do you figure that out? You can't really tell your boss, stop talking so much, I can't process all this. You have to find more ways to engage it. So by going through these scenarios, we help you figure out that, hey, that's the way my boss communicates with me, but I can maybe at the end of each time summarize it back to make sure I didn't miss anything. Or I can ask to take notes while they're talking so that supports me. So that way they're starting to really figure that out.
I love that this is interactive because I think for a lot of young people, when people are talking, they might tune them out, they might not be paying attention. So how are students reacting to the curriculum in the classroom?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is that it's interesting for some students, the idea that they're actually going to be expected to engage can at first be challenging. So they might have had a lot of experiences in the past where they were talked at, and so their expectation coming into the training might be that somebody's going to give them a lot of tips and a lot of information. And then when they come in and the expectation is that they're actually going to try things and talk about how things worked and share their opinions on these things, that can be challenging, but it also usually is exciting. So what we see is a lot of young people that maybe walk in sort of low energy and assuming that they already know this, because it can seem like topics that are sort of common sense. So even for adolescents, they'll say, we know this. And usually the attitude change from the beginning of, we already know this, to the end is, I want to know more. And for us, that's a really great attitude change because we think that's really one of the biggest things for youth is that if they are excited about learning more about work and about career, then they're on the right path, which I think is also very much what Future Ready is trying to do, to try and get young people to think more about the fact that these are really valuable questions to examine and that there's a whole host of ways to do that.
I also think that the curriculum provides young people with immediate tools to put into use as they go out the door. And I'll give you an example from something I saw last year in the YouthWorks program. It was great. It was a hospital setting, and there were about 11 young people working at this hospital, working very closely with a nursing staff, which is very unusual. Usually there's a lot of barriers for young people to explore careers in hospitals. So this was a great opportunity, and I talked to the young people about how they were doing. And one young woman said, well, we had a chance to meet some of the nurses and some of the staff people that we're going to job shadow with and work with. And I actually chose a nurse that had the same learning style as I did because I knew that we'd get along better and that I would learn more that way. So I think that was an example of someone just learning about learning styles and jumping in and using it.
That's really fascinating that they have that very quick takeaway once they leave the training. So I guess I'm thinking, what about the teachers and those who are leading the curriculum? What are the changes that they're seeing in students?
Well, we've gotten a lot of feedback, and this curriculum is in use from not only traditional classroom teachers in high school settings, but also really community-based educators. So across the board, the feedback has been positive. And what we've really heard from a lot of folks is that it's changed the way that they do this work. So, the expectation that they have for young people and what they're hoping to get out of it is dramatically increased by having something that allows them to engage students more. For teachers, the other thing that we hear is that young people start to understand that teachers are their first references, that they're actually part of your network. And when you look at somebody as being part of your network, you interact with them very differently than a lot of young people traditionally interact with their teachers. So the idea that this person may be the one that I want a boss to potentially call to see if I would be a good candidate for a job really motivates young people to value that relationship. And I think that that's great because the reality is employers are very open to that. One thing that we heard during our research was that employers did value teachers' opinions for references, even though their experience of a young person was not in a work setting. They know that school is all about doing work and learning, so it's not that different. And for young people to get that message as well and take advantage of that, it creates a really great opportunity. And I think it also brings along a different level of maturity to the whole interaction. We're all sort of now interacting with one another as a network, as opposed to I'm in my seat near my teacher type connection.
And employers are really noticing the difference, too, in the YouthWorks network. And, we've been using this curriculum only for a short time, I would say probably a year and a half. And in that time, I've heard a lot of our community partners say, hey, this looks different. I've never seen young people so ready to work, come in with such good attitudes. I know I can depend on them. I know I can give them tasks and they'll go above and beyond the job, and it looks different. Some people have said, what are you guys doing differently? So they're actually noticing a difference in the skill level and attitudes that young people come in with.
I love this other layer of helping students kind of create a network, talking about the teacher as a referral and really changing the relationships that they have and, building these relationships in a very positive way. In terms of what we call influential adults, so those could be parents, mentors, coaches who are working with young people, how can they help their students develop these soft skills?
Sure. I think that engaging in activities with young people that allow them to do this, to practice these soft skills, is a great way to go forward. And there's lots of things from small to large. Allowing a young person to take the lead on planning something, whether it's a event or a trip, just even in terms of letting them show that initiative and do that research and have ownership over that project can really be powerful. I think the other thing that, and this is more for, I would say, mentors than for parents, but for mentors, I think being really honest about what they would say if they were called as a reference and being transparent so that young people have a better sense of, not only where their strengths lie, but where they can improve. And I think that we want to have an interaction that focuses on positivity, but for youth, getting used to useful critical feedback is really, really a positive step. And I think oftentimes best fostered with someone that the young person can really trust, that they already know this feedback is coming from a good place. So that's another thing. I would say also encouraging them to practice more written communication in the form of email. I've definitely worked with parents and said, ask your student to email you at the end of the week and tell you what their week was. Ask them to give you a highlight reel email. And this really builds up that skill that's sometimes getting lost now for the younger generation that relies a lot on text. That piece of we need to communicate in full sentences. And I think young people have it, but they fall back on the habit of these shortcuts. And it's something that employers really notice and find really troublesome because it's really hard to allow a young person to interact with your clients if they're potentially going to communicate in that way. And that's something we hear over and over again. So just giving them the opportunity to practice that. And I've had parents do this and then they're really surprised at what their young person's email account actually is, which is always another issue of having an appropriate email address.
Well, I think along those lines, we're approaching the summer job season. What advice do you have for adults who are working with young people and this may be their first summer job?
Well, there's lots of things adults can do to help young people prepare for the upcoming job season. First of all, a young person should be ready with this, almost like a package. Given what employers are expecting now in entry-level jobs, it's really different. So young people really could use help with having a resume if that's appropriate. Definitely having adults walk them through the online application process because now, first of all, you can't walk into a store and get a job like talking to the manager anymore. Those days are pretty much over. Mm-hmm. Most stores and chains will direct you to the online application, which is a very tricky process. It's not just it's just not an application, it's a personality test.
Absolutely. And I'd like to definitely add to that. I think adults, a lot of times they haven't had to do as much of that. It hasn't necessarily been as big a part of their job search experience, and it can be really useful for them to sit down with the young person and go through that. And a lot of times what we see with young people on online applications is that it's just overwhelming. And, it's such a long process. Some of them have over 100 questions, can take close to 2 hours to do. And they need encouragement. The most common thing that I see with adolescents that start an online application is that they never finish it. They just don't make it through. If they do make it through, a lot of times halfway through they've sort of just gotten into the click anything mode, and then they're just discouraged because they didn't get a response back. And so having that influential adult sit down with them, not necessarily for every application because that's a lot of time, but at least for the first one, it's really helpful to have someone be there to help motivate you along, clarify questions that might seem confusing. You know, the adults are more used to those sort of job speak questions. Also provide that extra lens from experience because a lot of times for youth, they can't figure out why they're being asked the question. It doesn't seem related to the job. And for adults, it's a little clearer, oh, they want to know this because they want to know what kind of person, what kind of worker I am.
Right. Like, for example, a typical question will be, what's more important to you, an interesting job or helping people? Right? And that's very confusing to most young people because they don't understand the customer service lens that the employer is looking at. So that's definitely something that would be really helpful for adults to do. Also, I mean, a lot of these applications ask you to upload a resume first thing. So a resume is an important tool, and that's another piece of communication that's not always, young people don't understand. So that would be a great help. And also interview practice.
That's so crucial.
Yeah, getting practice answering those tough questions. And Jennifer has a great idea that they do in the curriculum is to have your mentor or someone in your network, you interview them so you can hear the type of answers that an adult would give you about their weaknesses or one of those hard questions.
It can be a really useful modeling experience. It also can help the young person feel a little more at ease because it can be really intimidating for a parent or a mentor or a teacher to sit down with a student and say, well, we're going to do a mock interview. Even the toughest students that I've known get very scared with mock interviews. I've seen more shaking hands and nervous stomachs and sort of even tears in the eyes over mock interviews because it immediately makes people nervous. And so that strategy of saying, here's the questions that we're going to practice, but you ask me first. Okay. Can a lot of times be really helpful. And also then sometimes adults are surprised at how much they get tripped up too, right? A lot of these questions, even just that classic, tell me about yourself, can set almost anybody off, right?
Exactly.
So then there's that okay, we all understand that this is hard. How do we figure out together how to get through this? And it creates a much more productive conversation.
So a lot of this is, I think, about practicing the skills.
And also, I think there's also value in helping young people kind of research any career ideas. I don't think young people get enough of that. They haven't really realistically understood, what the salaries are, what are the requirements to get into a job that they might always talk about, I'm going to be a vet. All right, well, what do you have to do to be a vet? How much do vets make? Right?
How much schooling
do you have to be? So these are really fascinating questions that young people oftentimes have no idea. So just even a little internet research together can go a long way in just clarifying some of the basic things about the labor market, right? First of all, a good activity might be, you want to work with animals? Find 10 jobs that work with animals and sort of go through that and see what might be a first job, a next job, a goal, something like that would be really useful.
So if an administrator or a youth program wants to bring this curriculum to their programming, what should they do?
Well, we run this program in our YouthWorks program, so 5,000 young people across the state will be taking part in the program as part of YouthWorks in 31 cities in Massachusetts. So that's one example. We also have the program in a couple of schools. We have it in Lowell High School and Malden High School, and we are expanding to other high schools next year. And if any group or school is interested, they can contact us and learn more about Signal Success and how to get involved in our programs.
Great.
I should probably also say, if you want to find out more about YouthWorks, it might be a little late to get into the program now, given that it's almost the beginning of May. But what I suggest is you go on our website, and on the YouthWorks page of our website, we have a list of local contacts, and you can email or call one of the local contacts to find out about the process for getting into the local YouthWorks programs.
Well, thank you, Anne and Jennifer. You provided some really useful information for our influential adults who are listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'd like to again thank Anne and Jennifer for joining us today. Administrators or program directors interested in learning more about Commonwealth Corporation or the Signal Success curriculum can visit www.comcorp.org. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Future Ready Spotlight. You can learn more about Future Ready Massachusetts at www.futurereadyma.org. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.